So the air raid sirens went off across Bahrain and Kuwait a few hours ago, and the headline says Iran hit 85 US military installations. That's the part everybody's repeating. But I went back through what actually happened and there's a number in there that changes everything. Quick thing before we get into it. Drop the country you're watching from in the comments so I know where everyone's tuning in today. I actually read them. Let me just start with something real because the news is moving fast and it's easy to miss the one detail that actually matters. The headline is explosive. Iran claims they targeted 85 American military installations in Bahrain, in Kuwait, and the air raid sirens are blaring. That part is confirmed. People on the ground in Manama and Kuwait City heard them. They're hearing them right now. That is real. But here's what most outlets are repeating without really pausing to think about it. They keep saying 85 targets. And that number is so big it just kind of slides past you. 85 military installations. That's not a skirmish. That's not a warning shot across the bow. That's a coordinated strike of a scale we haven't seen in this region for decades. And I'm not saying it to hype you up, I'm saying it because the math doesn't lie. That number is the story, the whole thing. But it's not the number that's worrying me the most, it's what they actually hit, or what they say they hit, because that's where things get complicated real fast. You need to understand something about how these things get reported. In the first few hours, nobody knows anything for sure. It's all fog and noise, and whoever shouts loudest gets to set the narrative. And right now Iran is shouting. They said they targeted 85 US military installations. That's an enormous claim. And the United States has not confirmed a single one of them yet. That's not unusual, it's actually standard. But what is unusual is the scale. Because if you read the Iranian statement carefully, and I mean really carefully, they say it's retaliation. Retaliation for US strikes on their southern Hormuzgan province and the port city of Mashhad. And the United States hit those targets because of what happened in the Strait of Hormuz. Let me back up a little, because if you just woke up to this news, you need the full picture. The day before yesterday, Iran attacked 3 commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. That's one of the most critical waterways in the entire world. 20% of global oil passes through that strait. 20%. That's not a number you can ignore. If that gets disrupted, the price of oil goes through the roof. Global markets get shaky, inflation ticks up, your grocery bill goes up, your gas bill goes up. Everything connected to the global supply chain goes up. And the United States responded. They hit more than 80 Iranian targets, 80. You see what's happening here? It's an escalation chain, a tit-for-tat that keeps increasing in magnitude. 3 vessels become 80 targets. 80 targets become 85 US installations. The numbers keep doubling and tripling. Nobody's stepping back. And if you're sitting in America right now thousands of miles away, it's easy to feel like this is somebody else's problem, a distant thing, something happening in a part of the world you'll never visit. But here's what I need you to understand. Bahrain and Kuwait are not random countries. They are home to some of the largest United States military installations outside the continental United States. Bahrain hosts the United States 5th Fleet. That's a huge naval presence. It's the headquarters for all American naval operations in the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, and the Red Sea. And Kuwait is home to several major Army, Air Force, and logistics bases. When we say 85 US military installations, those are the ones they're talking about, the ones that project American power across the entire Middle East. That's what Iran says they targeted. Now let me slow down for a second because I want you to feel the gravity of this. The air raid sirens sounding in Manama and Kuwait City, that's not just noise. People living there know exactly what that sound means. They've heard drills, they've heard alerts, but this is different. This is the real thing. I've been reading through the first reports coming out of the region, social media posts from people in Bahrain, videos of the sirens. There's a kind of silence underneath the noise. You can hear the sirens wailing, but the streets are empty, cars abandoned, lights off. People are staying inside. They're waiting. And nobody knows yet if all 85 of those reports are accurate. Nobody knows how much damage was done. The United States military doesn't issue damage assessments during active operations. They don't talk about casualties in real time. That's not how it works. But Iran is already calling this a success. They're already declaring victory. And that tells me something. It tells me they knew exactly what they were doing. This was calculated. This wasn't a panicked response. Let's go back to what triggered this. I told you about the Strait of Hormuz. Iran attacked 3 commercial vessels there. But what I haven't told you yet is why they attacked those vessels, and I think that's where the real story lives. The Strait of Hormuz has been a flashpoint for years. Iran has threatened to close it multiple times. They've seized tankers. They've harassed military and civilian shipping alike. And the United States and its allies have consistently said they will keep the strait open. That is one of the red lines. You don't mess with the strait. But the vessels that were attacked, there are reports they were connected to Israel indirectly through ownership chains, through charter arrangements, through insurance, the kind of connection that's designed to be deniable, but is actually very real. And if that connection is true, if Iran attacked vessels connected to Israel, then the US response was always going to be a response on behalf of Israel. That's the unspoken understanding in the region. You strike Israel shipping, you're striking the United States. But the American response was massive, more than 80 targets. That's not a proportional response to 3 commercial vessels. That's a message, a very loud message. And Iran's response is just as loud. The thing that scares me is how fast this escalated. It happened over maybe 48 hours, and we went from 3 commercial vessels being attacked to 85 US military installations being struck. The escalation ladder just vanished. There's no step between these two things. You can't go from 3 to 80 to 85 without skipping something important. That middle step is what keeps nations from going to war, and I think we just skipped it. The entire ladder gone. Now, Kuwait's foreign ministry isn't mincing words. They condemned what they called renewed Iranian attacks on its sovereignty. They're not trying to stay neutral. They came out and said it. That's a significant diplomatic move because Kuwait is close to Iran geographically, but allied with the United States. And when they start talking like that, when they start using language like renewed attacks on sovereignty, they're signaling that they're done with the Iranian provocations. But being done with them and doing something about them are two very different things. Kuwait is a small country, a rich country, but small. They have the American military presence on their soil, but that American presence is exactly what Iran was targeting. So it's a catch-22. The people they rely on for defense are the people Iran is using as targets. Let me tell you about Mashhar. You've probably never heard of it. Most Americans haven't. It's not a famous city. It's not Thran. It's a port city in southwestern Iran, and it's strategically important. It's on the Persian Gulf coast. It's near major oil and gas fields. It's industrial, and the US strikes hit it. But why Mashhar specifically? It's not a military target the way the Fifth Fleet is. It's not a nuclear facility. It's not a missile base. So why did the US choose Mashhar? Here's my best guess. The US wanted to send a message that no part of Iran is safe. Not just the military sites, not just the Revolutionary Guard bases. If they can hit your industrial port, your logistical center, the thing that moves your goods, you understand that the reach is total. You understand that you are vulnerable everywhere. And Iran understood that perfectly because what did they do? They didn't retaliate by hitting a US naval vessel. They didn't hit a single target. They said they hit 85 military installations, the total number, the humiliation. They want the United States to feel what they felt. And now we're in a cycle, a death spiral. I think we need to ask ourselves a question, and it's a hard one. It's the kind of question you don't ask out loud in polite company. Are we heading towards something bigger, something beyond these back and forth strikes? Because when you look at the numbers, when you look at the language both sides are using, there's no off-ramp, there's no diplomatic language. There's no we remain committed to a negotiated solution kind of nonsense. There's just retaliation, strike and counterstrike, escalation and counter-escalation. And that's how wars start. Not with a big announcement, not with a declaration. They start with a series of actions that nobody can back away from. Each one makes the next one inevitable. Each one forces the other side to respond, and before you know it, the thing is moving on its own. Nobody's in control. I've seen this before. We've all seen it. You can trace the Gulf War back to a bunch of individual decisions that seemed reasonable at the time. You can trace the Iraq War back to a series of provocations and responses. History is a system of mousetraps. You pull one, the other one snaps, and I think we just pulled a very big one. The source of this news matters. I've been reading the Iranian government's official statements. They're not hiding anything. They're not being coy. They announced it publicly. They said this is what they did, and they framed it as revenge. Revenge for the US strikes on their territory. Revenge for the vessels. Revenge for everything. But here's the part that isn't being said in the mainstream coverage. The part one think is the scariest. Iran didn't just say they struck 85 military installations. They said they struck them in Bahrain and Kuwait. Those are US military installations on the territory of 2 other sovereign nations. That's a massive violation of sovereignty. Not just American sovereignty, Kuwaiti sovereignty, Bahraini sovereignty. And Kuwait has already condemned it. What happens when the United States decides to defend a sovereign ally? What happens when the terms of the mutual defense agreements get invoked? Article 5 of the NATO treaty gets talked about a lot, but the United States has bilateral defense agreements with a ton of countries. Kuwait is one of them. Bahrain is one of them. If those agreements are triggered, if the United States decides that an attack on US forces in Kuwait is an attack on the United States itself, we're in a very different situation. Now let me be careful here. I'm not saying we're at war. I'm not saying this is the start of World War II. I'm saying the boundaries are shifting. The threshold has been crossed. What was previously unthinkable is now thinkable. And that shift matters. It changes the entire political calculus. It changes how every country in the region responds. It changes how oil markets respond. And it changes how you and I experience the world. Even if we never hear a single siren, there's something else I want to draw your attention to. The timing. This didn't happen at 3 a.m. local time. It didn't happen in a quiet moment. It happened in a window that maximizes attention. It happened when the global news cycle was hungry for something new. When the world was already on edge. When the conflict in Ukraine is still simmering. When tensions with China are still elevated. when the Middle East is a powder keg. Anyway, why now? I think there's a theory that doesn't get enough attention. Iran is feeling squeezed. Their economy is under sanctions. Their allies are distracted. Russia is tied up in Ukraine. China has its own economic problems. And Hezbollah and Hamas are licking their wounds. For the first time in a while, Iran is alone. Really alone. And what do isolated regimes do? They lash out. They prove they still matter. They show they can disrupt. They demonstrate that ignoring them is not an option. That's not a justification. It's just a reality, a geopolitical reality. So this strike, these 85 installations, they're not just about the commercial vessels. They're not just about Mashar. They're about projection. Iran wants the world to know that even without Russia, even without China backing them openly, they can still make things happen. They can still hit where it hurts. But that's the dangerous part, because if you're the United States, you can't let that stand. You can't have a state-level actor striking your military bases and saying, yeah, we did that, without consequences. But every consequence you take, every military strike you launch, it validates their original move. It justifies their retaliation, and the cycle continues. That's the trap. That's the thing nobody can solve. When you're in a cycle of escalation with a country like Iran, you're not just fighting them, you're fighting the logic of the cycle, and that logic always wins. It always pushes things further unless somebody steps back. But who's going to step back first? I remember talking to a retired Army colonel a few years ago. He was a Middle East specialist, and he said something that stuck with me. He said, Ahmed, the biggest problem isn't that Iran is unreasonable. They're very reasonable. They operate on a clear cost-benefit calculus. The problem is that their calculus doesn't include any cost that the United States is willing to pay. That's what I keep thinking about. Iran's threshold for suffering is much higher than ours. They think in decades. They think in centuries. They're not fighting for oil prices or shipping lanes. They're fighting for regime survival, for regional hegemony, for the future of the Islamic Republic, and when you're fighting for that, 85 military installations is just a Tuesday. I don't want to minimize the human cost. Those bases are full of people, Americans, contractors, locals, families, people who do laundry and serve food and maintain vehicles, people who are just doing their jobs. And if any of those 85 strikes actually hit their targets, real people are in danger right now. I've been trying to find confirmation of casualties. It's early, too early. The military doesn't release that information until they've contacted next of kin, and the fog of war is thick. So if you're seeing reports of casualties on Twitter or Telegram or whatever, be skeptical. But here's the thing. Even if there are no casualties, even if Iran struck empty bunkers and abandoned barracks, the psychological impact is enormous. Think about what it means for morale, for troop morale. You're sitting on a base in Kuwait. You're doing your job. You're supporting operations. You're not on the front lines. And suddenly, air raid sirens. Suddenly, you're the target, not the enemy, not the insurgents, a state military, Iran. That's a shift. That's a mental shift. I also want to talk about the geopolitical theater, the UN, the Arab League, the European powers. What are they going to do? Because when the United States and Iran are trading strikes, a lot of countries find themselves stuck in the middle. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, they're all watching. They're all worried because the Strait of Hormuz is the lifeline. Oil tankers from Saudi Arabia, from Kuwait, from Qatar, from the UAE, from Iran itself, they all go through that strait. If it becomes a shooting gallery, nobody makes money. Nobody moves product. The global economy sputters. And the one thing you can't have is a sputtering global economy. Not with inflation already high, not with food prices already unstable, not with energy markets already jumpy. So that's the pressure. That's the invisible force, economics. The one thing that actually gets politicians to care, because you can ignore a lot of things. You can ignore human rights abuses. You can ignore bad behavior. You can ignore violations of international law. You can't ignore a global oil shock, because that hits the voters, that hits the donors, that hits the corporations, and that's real. So let me take you into the possible futures, because that's where this gets really interesting. I see 3 paths. Path 1, a ceasefire through back channels, through European mediators, through Oman, and understanding that nobody wants this to get bigger. Both sides claim victory. The US says it defended its allies. Iran says it avenged its dead. Everybody walks away a little bit angrier than before, but still walking. Path 2, a limited war. The US hits more Iranian targets, specifically the Revolutionary Guard naval forces that operate near the strait. Iran hits more US and allied targets. The violence stays contained within a certain corridor, a certain set of parameters. Bloody, sad, but contained. Path 3, a full-blown regional war. Israel gets involved. The US deploys additional forces. Iran activates its proxies in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. The whole region goes up, oil prices triple, shipping almost stops, and the world enters a global recession. I don't think Path 3 is likely, but I also don't think it's impossible. And that's the scariest thing I can say. It's not impossible. What I want you to hold on to is this. The structure of international relations is designed to make Path 1 the default. It's designed to pull things back from the brink. There are diplomats, there are crisis lines, there are red phones, but all those things require both sides to want to use them, to want to de-escalate, to want to cooperate. And right now, I don't see a lot of wanting on either side. I keep hearing this word retaliation. I've used it myself in this script, but think about what it means. Retaliation, a return of something, a payment, a debt being settled. And when you're settling debts, when you're paying back, you keep adding interest, you keep escalating the amount because you want it to hurt, you want the other side to feel what you felt. And that's where we are. Both sides have felt something, now they're paying it back with interest. Let's talk about the Fifth Fleet for a second, based in Bahrain. That's the fleet that's supposed to keep the waters open. That's the fleet that's supposed to be the policeman of the Persian Gulf. If Iran thinks it can hit those bases and get away with it, then the Fifth Fleet loses its deterrent power, its reputation, its mystique. And in geopolitics, reputation is everything. It's the currency of credibility. That's why the American response was so severe. That's why they hit more than 80 targets. They were responding to the vessel attacks, yes, but they were also sending a message. That message was don't mess with the Fifth Fleet, don't mess with the Strait, don't mess with the balance of power. But Iran just responded to that message with 85 targets. So now what message does the United States send next? You see how this works? It's a spiral, it's a feedback loop. And like any feedback loop, it can get out of control fast. I want to take a step back. I've been talking about strategy and politics and economics, but let's be human for a moment. Imagine being in Manama right now. Imagine being in Kuwait City. You hear the sirens. You don't know if this is the real thing or another drill. You don't know if the next sound you hear is an explosion or silence. There are American service members in those countries. There are children. There are families. There are people who just moved there. People who thought they were safe. People who thought the bases were secure, and now they're not sure. So I keep coming back to that question, the one I keep asking myself, the one I don't have a good answer for. How far are we willing to go? How many targets are enough? How many retaliations are enough? How much escalation is enough? Because if you don't have an answer to that question, if you don't have a limit, you'll keep going until you hit something you can't come back from. And I don't think either side has a limit right now. I don't think either side has drawn a line in the sand and said this far and no further. And that's the part that worries me. The absence of limits. The United States has a massive military advantage, air superiority, naval dominance, intelligence, cyber capability. They can do enormous damage. Iran has a different kind of advantage. Proximity, asymmetric warfare, proxies, the willingness to absorb punishment. They can do enormous damage too, just in a different way. And when you have two powers with that much destructive capability and no clear limits, the outcome is unpredictable, truly unpredictable. Not the kind of unpredictable you see on cable news. The real kind. The kind that keeps people awake at night. I'm not trying to be alarmist. I'm trying to be honest because I think we deserve honesty right now. We deserve to look at this situation with clear eyes. Here's what I know. The air raid sirens are real. The strikes are real. The escalation is real. And there's a deeply unsettling symmetry to it all. The United States hit more than 80 targets. Iran said they hit 85. They're not hiding it. They want us to know. They want us to feel the math. 80 and 85. Almost the same number. That's a deliberate choice. That's not a coincidence. That's a message. It's a mirror. They took what the United States did and they did it right back with a few more for good measure. And that's what sticks in my head. The deliberateness, the calculation, the cold, clinical way Iran announced it. They didn't say we regret this. They didn't say we were forced. They just said it factually, proudly. This is what we did. Kuwait has already condemned it. Bahrain will too. But what happens when the condemnation isn't enough? What happens when the United Nations condemns it and nothing changes? What happens when the Arab League issues a statement and nothing changes? What happens when the words stop mattering? Because that's where we're heading. Toward the point where words don't matter anymore, where only actions matter. And actions in this context mean explosions, mean casualties, mean escalation. There's a phrase that gets thrown around in crisis negotiations, the point of no return, and I think we're close to it, dangerously close. If the United States responds again and Iran responds again, and that cycle keeps spinning, we'll hit it. We'll cross that invisible line, and then we're in a place where nobody can predict what happens next. So let me leave you with a thought, a real one, a personal one. I've been doing this a long time. I've covered conflicts. I've read the intelligence reports. I've interviewed the generals and the diplomats and the spies. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that the people making decisions right now are not as in control as you think they are. They're making decisions based on incomplete information, on fear, on ego, on political pressure. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just how it works. It's messy, it's human. And human beings in crisis don't always make the right calls. So when you hear about 85 military installations being targeted, when you hear about the sirens going off in Kuwait and Bahrain, don't just scroll past it. Don't just say, oh, another Middle East thing. Let it sit with you for a minute. Let it be real, because it is real and it's happening right now, and I'm going to keep watching it. I'm going to keep reading the reports. I'm going to keep trying to understand what the hell is actually happening, because I think that's the only thing we can do. Understand, stay informed, stay awake. The war in Ukraine has been dominating the headlines, the tensions with China, the economy, the election. There's so much noise. It's hard to focus on one thing. But this one thing, this is a big deal, a really big deal, and I don't think we're talking about it enough. So here's where I land. After going through all of it, after reading the statements, after thinking about the numbers, this is not just a military confrontation. It's a test. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. I'm going to keep watching this closely over the next few days. I'll be back with updates as soon as I've made sense of them. Thanks for staying with me through this one. And if you want to keep hearing the parts the big networks skip, go ahead and subscribe. That's the whole point of this